Hello, I'm going to start making a quilt today, and I'm going to make a quilt with hexagons in. People don't really like to make hexagon quilts because they think they're difficult to put together, but I'm going to show you a way today where this is really easy to put together. But first of all, let me show you the fabric. I have this really pretty fabric. It's Japanese fabric, and I bought this a while ago, and it's from Shibori Dragon. There are two lighter coloured pieces. That one and this one that has butterflies on. And then there's this one that's lots of burnt oranges and blues and different fabrics. And I just think these are so pretty. And so what I'm going to do is my main hexagons I'm going to make in the creams. This dark is going to be the triangle edges that set it off. So first of all, I'm going to lay some of this fabric out and cut some hexagons out. This fabric has got patterns everywhere on it, so I don't really think I can do any strategic cutting. I think wherever I cut, some nice patterns will come out of it and be found. And I'm going to try to cut more than one at once, otherwise it'll take a long time. This is not one of those kind of patterns where it's a fast cutting kind of a pattern. Here's my hexagon. And I think probably the easiest way to cut it is, I think it'll be easy just to lay my ruler along the edges and cut it with my rotary cutter. So I'm just going to lay this along the edge and cut it off. And I don't really know how big this quilt is going to be because I'm limited as to how much fabric I've got here. If it's not big enough to make a large size quilt, this is going to make a nice wall hanging, and I'll enjoy it like that. I probably would have been better to have ironed this fabric as well before I cut it. And I actually think that before I cut any more shapes out, I think I will just run the iron over it. It'll just make my life easier. So these are going to be my basic hexagon shapes. And I'm just going to cut all that fabric into these shapes. The measurement of this hexagon is 4 inches. And so let me just show you, this triangle is 4 inches all the way around. You see that? It's 4 inches. Each edge was 4 inches before I trimmed it. I'm just going to fold that again. And again, I don't know if I'll have enough of this fabric. I'm going to cut as many as I can out of it. When I realise how many I actually need, then I'll just go ahead and buy some more fabric of the same colours if I need to. I guess I would say that this is not really the way you would usually measure out your fabric. You know, usually you have a plan of how big you're making it. You buy the right amount of fabric. But because this is just some fabric that I've already got, I want to make the best use of it and use up as much of it as I can. And so that's why I'm doing it this way. So each time I cut one, I'll just turn this around, sit it on the next space. I'm matching it up carefully to my cut line there. When I sew these triangles on here, they'll go on the edge like that, and the other one opposite. I have all my pieces cut out now for this quilt. Well, I say all, but I may need to cut more later. For the moment, I have all the pieces that I'm going to use. And you'll see I've also cut some navy blue, and that's because this is going to have some Sashiko on it. So to put this quilt together, I need to put a corner triangle in 2 places. First of all, I'm going to chain sew, and I'm just going to put these 4 pieces on. I've got some navy blue thread on my sewing machine. When I come to doing the cream, which I'm going to do the same thing to, I'll actually switch to a cream thread. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to turn these around and do it on the other side. This is actually the opposite edge line that I'm doing. So there are the finished pieces I've made up to now. So Sashiko will go in the middle here. Having this sewn on there doesn't make any difference to doing that. And I'll do some patterns on there before I decide where to place those navy blue blocks in the quilt. So now I'm going to switch to some cream thread, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing with this pile here. Now once you have all your hexagons made, you have a lot of pieces that look like that. Here's your central hexagon, and these pieces on the edge are your triangles. So you can see the triangle is sewn on opposite sides. Now when I lay these out, if I just push them all together, you can see that this is what forms the rows. So the whole quilt is just made up of rows like this. Once you've put all the rows together in a strip like this, then you sew the strips together. The thing is, though, that your row is actually going to be on the diagonal like that. So when you're first looking at it, it might look a bit odd. And as you come down towards the corners, you're going to make smaller and smaller rows to form the corner. There'll be a little bit left over, and I'll show you how to deal with that. So I'm showing you it this way because it's just such a simple pattern, and I think when you see it in fabric, it's a little bit hard to understand what's going on, but when you see it in a little diagram form like this, I think then you can see better. I've jumped a little bit ahead here so I can show you that strip in fabric. Here you can see the hexagon with triangle block sewn in. Each of these strips is made of that little block you made, the hexagon with the 2 triangles. That's the seam where they were sewn together. If I pull my camera back a little bit, you can see how it forms a basically square shape, just by each row becoming shorter each time you sew them together. And this section here, this corner is sewn together. Each row is then flipped down, a seam sewn along there, and it continues that way through the quilt. I'm taking a step back here, so I think you can see now why I showed you the other part first, because this just looks confusing. And you can see you will be left with this triangle along the side edges. And this is easy to deal with. It's another piece cut exactly the same as the ones you sewed to the triangle. And you just sew it on to the end of the row. And then when you come to sew them together, it just sews in along with the strip. It doesn't need any special handling. You just have to add it in. And I chose a blue for mine, so you can see it laying under there where I'm deciding whether that's the colour that I want to use. So I have the blocks here to sew into one individual row. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm pinning them in place so that they're right. Most of the rows of strips are just constructed like this, so you end up with the long rows as I showed you laying on the bed. top and bottom edges are always going to be hexagon shaped instead of the straight rows that you want. So to handle this, you can either half your shapes and sew them together, which when you've constructed the rows, you'll see that that is actually easier than it sounds. If you use half the shape, though, do remember to add your 1/4 inch. The other way is just to complete the quilt with the odd hexagon looking edge and then just cut that off afterwards. So whichever you're comfortable with. I decided to use the half a piece method. See how that's made a straight line? Now that's ready to sew to the next piece. And I'm just going to press these open. So that one's ready to lay back down onto the quilt, and so is this corner. And you can see one of the half hexagons there. I've got this laid out better where you can see now. These bottom 2 rows are sewn together. Do you see that? And I can actually flip that onto there and just sew that because it's ready. And those are nice straight rows to sew, and it makes it really easy. I've also added these blue triangles, and it's exactly the same size, the 4-inch triangle, as the other ones. And they just sit on the end of the row. You just sew them just the same as you're sewing all the other parts together. This row here obviously is not sewn together because it's got the Sashiko blocks in there. And then again, I have another row here all sewn together, ready to go. So until I do the Sashiko now, I can't do anything else. So that's going to be the next thing that I do. I'm going to start putting patterns on these navy blue hexagons that I made for putting Sashiko onto. And I'm using a different kind of a transfer sheet here. It's called white transfer paper. It says great for Sashiko embroidery, painting, quilting, towel painting, woodworking and more. I don't know what towel painting is. I'll have to look that up. This is the transfer sheet in here. And it's very thin. It just looks like tracing paper, but it's kind of brown on one side and lighter coloured on the other. For this hexagon, I drew a little butterfly template. I'm arranging my paper. I've got my hexagon under here. I'm arranging my paper so that I think that it'll be fairly central. I want to be able to see these 2 edges because I can line my butterflies up better that way. Not really having these exactly in the centre, just, you know, the eyeball centre really, as I call it. Nobody's going to be getting a micrometer out and measuring. And then I'm just going to press quite hard and draw over this pattern. Now we'll lift it up and see if it's on there. Oh yes, and that's on there. Okay, so I'll finish drawing this and then I'm going to do the Sashiko. And these will be ready to go onto my quilt. This is the thread that I'm using for this project. It's actually Daruma Sashiko thread, and the colour is 202. It's kind of a off-white, creamy kind of a colour. I'm starting with a knot on this. The back's going to be hidden inside the quilt. It's not going to show. Just doing my usual loading the stitches onto the needle. And then, of course, the stroking the stitches for tension control. I didn't video a whole lot of footage for this Sashiko on this. I was really showing you more how to make the quilt. So I just have a little bit of this here, and then I'll show you the finished block. And this is the butterfly pattern done. I'm going to use this template for this pattern. These are some new templates that I've got. With the Sashiko completed, all these strips can be sewn together now. You'll see I added one more fabric here to make this quilt a bit larger. I'm really getting this quilt together now, and there's not a whole lot of matching, but some places that you really do want to match are these corners. Do you see how that kind of forms a star? So you want those corners to meet up. And so I was just going to show you the way that I do this. So this is my seam that I'm sewing together here. So this is where the join will be, and you can see these don't go in the same direction. You want them to make a kind of a V, and then when they open up they'll meet properly. So the best way to do that is if you fold this one down about 1/4 inch and leave about 1/4 inch on the top one, then you want those seams to go in a straight diagonal line down. And so then just let that flip open, pin it there, and it should match up when you do a 1/4 inch seam along there. So I'm going to go all the way along doing that, and then I'll machine that row and I'll show you what it looks like. So these are the ones that we were matching there. It's pretty good. Haven't pressed this yet, but I think you can still see that they match up quite well there. So when the pattern's finished, that'll all look nice and neat. Now the corners on this quilt, there's two like this where there's just a small corner left. And so what I did on that was just put a half of the blue triangle. So that's two corners the same there. And then I'm going to just turn this around and I'll show you the other corner. And now I'm left with just this very tiny corner here that I'm just going to fill in. I'm going to get some cream. I have a half a hexagon cut here. So I'm going to just cut the right shape and sew those onto there like that. And then this will be square and it'll be ready for the next round of whatever I'm going to put on here. To make this easy, I just cut an oblong of fabric, sewed it across the corner, and now I'm just going to take a ruler and just trim and make that into the corner. And that's just a really simple way to do the corner. You want to make sure you cut this oversized. It's really easy to cut it too small, so I just cut quite a big piece. So I measured my quilt and I've decided to put 2.5 inch strips around the edge. I'm using this blue because there is actually blue in the fabric, and also those little corner points, diamond points that I put in down the side parts of this fabric. I did trim the sides as well a little bit, just to really just tiny little bits off, just to make sure they were a straight line, because you know, if it's a little bit jagged when you sew this on, it just really shows up for some reason. So I made sure they were nice and straight. So now I'm just going to sew these two strips onto the sides. I'll just press those open, and then I'll measure and cut 2.5 inch strips to go along the top and the bottom. I had to make some changes to this quilt. The pretty fabric that makes up the star looks fine close up. From a distance, it just disappears into the pattern. So off camera, I've been doing a lot of unpicking and had to put this dark fabric in to make more definition. But I wanted to use these fabrics in this quilt, so this is how I'm going to do it. I've made a very plain blue border, and I'm going to put a few of them around the border. They have already got the little folds there from when they were in the quilt, so that's making this part a little bit easier. And so if I just bring this here, you can see what I'm doing. So I found the very centre of this, where the border will be on the quilt. and then I laid these triangle shapes on there, and I've opened them out at the bottom because this will be seamed in, but the sides I've folded in. For the moment they're just going to lay there, and later on I'll stitch them down. And I think I'm just going to do a Sashiko row along the edge of each one. I think that'll look quite nice. And I've got the edge of my pins sticking out so that I can see them when I sew this on, and I don't sew on my pins. So now I'm just going to put this on my quilt. I've just used a pin there. That's just to mark the centre point. And then I'll line that up with my centre marking that I made here. And put a pin in there. And so when I sew it in, it'll lay on there. And so I'm going to pin this all the way along and then just machine 1/4 of an inch down this edge, which I'm not going to do on camera, but I will show you when it's on. Now for the other two borders, I've made the strip this way. So there's 3 of the brown triangles. The reason I did this in a different way was because this piece that I'm making was too short anyway to put on holes. I would have had to join a strip to make this side border, and so I decided to make use of that. And so this is where I divided it, and then the other half is sewn onto this side, and this section in the middle is long enough where I only needed to use 1 strip. So I'll just go ahead and show you how I constructed this. So I took 3 of my, let me get 3 more here, 3 of my brown coloured squares here. Let's use those 3. And I cut 2 more navy blue squares that are the same size. And I just sat those in the middle of the and I just joined those 3 end to end. So I'll do that section and then I'll show you how I join the other part onto there. Those 3 are joined now to make that little section, and I do just need to press that. And the next thing I'm going to do is I've cut my long strip in half using this diagonal seam, and to do this I just used the edge of the triangle pattern that I used for these. And the way I'm going to do this now is, let me just get that way you can see better. So this piece is going to fit on there like that. So I'm going to fold it so that these 2 edges seam, so it won't be level this way, but this edge here will be level. So I'm going to fold it down like that, and then I can see what my position is and just line these 2 up. And sewing this on here, it's really like just sewing a triangle on. Just ignore the rest of the strip of fabric and just sew this onto here in place. So I'll just sew that. And now when I open that up, you can see that I have this straight piece for putting on my border. Now this piece is, I'll put the other side on in exactly the same way. So this piece is done, but I'm going to go back to my original piece that I've already made and sew it to the border. And I'm going to put these 2 borders on just the same as the others, finding the centre point, matching the 2 centres up, and then doing a 1/4 inch seam along the edge when it's all pinned. And then I'm just going to pin this along and sew it on there in exactly the same way. So I'll pin this and then I'll sew this on. I'm just going to sew along this seam now, and this border will be done. on there now. That's a little bit of a different look for a border. I'll get the other side on and I'll almost be done with this. So the top is basically done. It's not quite what I envisioned, but I still wanted to show it as a video because it's such an easy pattern to put together. And I think you'll enjoy doing that, whether you do Sashiko in it or not. I'm probably going to do this again in just some other colours. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.